For years, East Africa faced a nightmare that rolled across the skies. Endless swarms of locusts consuming everything below. Entire crops disappeared, and the earth fell quiet under their shadows. The world offered support, and it failed. Chemicals, machines, and flames couldn't stop them. Then Africa made a move no one thought was possible. In a decision that defied reason and every scientific expectation, billions of locusts were released deliberately. What happened next transformed disaster into something no one predicted for the entire world. Africa's food crisis. It is difficult to picture that a land known for rich soil and powerful rivers now struggles simply to feed its people. Yet, this is the truth of modern Africa. Today, Africa is home to nearly 1.5 billion people. Within the next 25 years, that number is expected to rise to 2.5 billion. Even now, 307 million Africans go to sleep hungry on a regular basis. That means nearly 1 out of every 5 people cannot find enough food to stay alive. By the year 2030, global forecasts predict 582 million people living in chronic hunger. More than half of them will live in Africa. Over 45 million children under the age of 5 suffer from wasting, the most deadly form of malnutrition. Almost 2/3 of these children live in sub-Saharan Africa. These are not just statistics. They show up as empty bowls, as quiet rooms and clinics where mothers cradle burning, fragile babies, and in the hollow eyes of children who should be laughing and playing. In Sudan, the crisis has crossed into disaster. Over 8 million people stand on the edge of survival, and 638,000 face days with no food at all. To the south, in Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia, the pattern repeats. This is hard to match with old images of East Africa's abundance, from ancient basalt lands that made soil dark and fertile, to a Nile so deep and blue it felt endless, and the wide waters of Lake Victoria that fed communities for generations. So what went wrong? Conflict provides part of the answer. War disrupts planting seasons and forces families off their land. Broken infrastructure makes everything worse. Nearly a quarter of all crops go to waste because cold storage does not exist and roads cannot be relied on. Billions of dollars each year are spent importing food that could be grown much closer to home. Even when families can afford to buy food, the weather often destroys hope. Droughts burn the land, leaving crops withered and animals dead. Then the rains return, not softly, but as floods that sweep away what little remains. The cycle repeats, and every wave pushes millions closer to the edge of starvation. And just when it seemed nothing could possibly become worse, something completely unexpected appeared. Something that would transform the war against hunger in ways no one ever imagined. The swarm that came with the wind. In late 2019, something small but dangerous began to rise across Africa's skies. It started with scorching winds blowing out of the Arabian desert and powerful rains drenching the Indian Ocean region. Together, they created the perfect conditions for one of the most feared insects on Earth, the desert locust. Under normal conditions, these insects live calm, solitary lives spread across dry and open land. But nature had other plans. When long droughts suddenly turn into heavy rainfall, the land transforms. Damp soil gives birth to fresh vegetation, and that sudden green landscape calls a locust like an open feast. The wet earth becomes the ideal place to lay their eggs. It helps their young survive the brutal sun. At first, their numbers are small. Then the real transformation begins. As more locusts gather in the same areas, they begin brushing and colliding with one another. They also react to each other's scent. This constant contact triggers something remarkable. Their bodies grow bigger. Their color shifts to bold black and yellow, and their behavior changes completely. The once quiet, green, night-loving insects become aggressive and restless. Most importantly, they become social. Scientists call this transformation gregarization. Now, instead of avoiding each other, they seek constant company. They form dense clusters that grow into massive swarms, moving as one unstoppable living cloud. These new super locusts develop stronger wings, larger muscles, and tighter coordination. They can travel great distances, flying as far as 90 miles in a single day. And when they arrive, they don't just eat, they erase. A single swarm can contain around 80 million locusts, consuming as much food in one day as 35,000 people. Crops disappear overnight. Trees are stripped bare. In the quiet that follows, nothing green is left standing. East Africa quickly became the center of this growing nightmare. Countries like Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, and Uganda found themselves trapped beneath skies that were darkened by insects. In Kenya alone, 70,000 hectares of farmland were overrun. Across the region, more than 20 million people were pushed into severe food insecurity. Entire harvests vanished before they could even be gathered. The cruel reality was how preventable it all had been. Months earlier, the Food and Agriculture Organization had issued warnings about the locust threat. However, many nations lacked the tools and resources to act. As a result, communities that had barely healed from drought were pushed back toward starvation once again. By the time the world understood how serious the disaster had become, it was already too late. Governments and aid agencies rushed to respond, but the damage had already spread across vast areas. And as the skies above East Africa filled with living clouds, scientists began searching for a solution unlike anything used before. Something unexpected was about to be attempted. Nature's failed cure. They call it the green weapon, a solution born from desperation, mixed with fragile hope. For years, chemical pesticides were the only shield against the desert locust. They worked, yes, but at a terrible cost. Fields were soaked in toxic chemicals that showed no mercy, killing not just pests but also the insects and animals that kept the ecosystem alive. Over time, the soil weakened, rivers and wells became tainted, and farmers slowly began to wonder if their fight to protect food was quietly destroying the very land beneath their feet. That was the moment science chose a softer approach. Researchers searched nature itself for an answer and discovered something remarkable. What they found was a fungus called Metarhizium acridum. Unlike deadly chemicals, this fungus targeted only locusts and left all other life untouched. It was celebrated as a breakthrough, a natural biopesticide that many believed would transform how Africa fought its most devastating enemy. The Food and Agriculture Organization, in partnership with the British government, introduced the fungus into East Africa. They were confident it would be the weapon to finally shift the balance. The process sounded simple. When a locust came into contact with the fungal spores, it became infected. The fungus bored through the insect's tough outer shell and began multiplying inside. It spread through its body, slowly consuming it from within. Within days, the locust would die, releasing fresh spores into the air, ready to infect the next swarm. On paper, it looked perfect. A single droplet of the spore solution could travel for miles. The wind would carry it, and it would multiply with every new contact. It was meant to be the biological miracle the region had waited for. But Africa's harsh deserts had different plans. The fungus was delicate. To survive, it had to be stored at temperatures below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. That sounded easy inside a laboratory. But in the burning heat of Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia, it became almost impossible. Many rural communities had no reliable electricity, and nearly 70% of storage sites had no refrigeration at all. In reality, these storage centers were nothing more than metal shacks slowly cooking under the desert sun. By the time the spores were desperately needed, they were already dead. Over 300,000 liters of the precious fungal solution had lost their power before they could even be sprayed. The FAO had calculated that, if applied correctly, the fungus could reduce the locust population by 90% in just a few days. But that moment never came. Instead, the surviving swarms continued to breed. Billions of locusts multiplied and pushed into new regions. Crops disappeared once again, and farmers stood helpless, watching months of hard work vanish before their eyes. It was a brutal lesson. Science had offered hope, but nature, once again, proved far more difficult to control. What happened next would force the world to rethink how it fights nature's oldest and most unstoppable plagues. Green gold of the desert. No one saw it coming. The idea that the same insects destroying Africa's crops could also become a source of survival sounded impossible. When the swarms first arrived, they stripped the land bare and left behind only dust, silence, and despair. Fields turned lifeless. But hunger has a way of changing how people think. Slowly, a bold idea began to move through the villages. If they couldn't stop the locusts, maybe they could turn them into food instead. At first, it felt like surrender. Eating the very creatures that had ruined their harvests felt humiliating. But as weeks turned into months with almost nothing to eat, people had no choice. Families gathered whatever they could, collecting locusts from empty fields, catching them at night when they clung to trees, or trapping them in nets along the rivers. After gathering, they dried them beneath the burning sun, crushed them into fine powder, and mixed them with grain flour. It wasn't luxury food, but it kept people alive. From thick porridge to flatbread, these meals gave strength to people who had lost almost everything. Across Kenya, Uganda, and Ethiopia, something unexpected began to unfold. Villages that once looked at the dark skies with fear now began to see opportunity. Locusts were no longer only a curse. They were becoming survival. People started calling them the green gold of the desert. The same insects that had symbolized hunger were now helping to defeat it. Elders who had lived through countless invasions began to speak in a new way. Some said that when the swarms arrived, they no longer cursed the sky, but prepared their cooking fires instead. They claimed that a single swarm could feed an entire community for weeks. Then came a discovery that shocked even scientists. When researchers tested the locusts, they found something extraordinary. These insects were packed with nutrition, and not just a little. Every 3.5 ounces of dried locust contained between 1.5 to more than 2.5 ounces of pure protein. To understand what that means, the same amount of chicken contains only about 1.2 ounces. Beef has about 1. In simple terms, pound for pound, locusts contain more than twice the protein of beef. But that wasn't the end of it. Locusts are rich in iron, zinc, calcium, and omega-3 fatty acids. These are nutrients that millions of people across East Africa don't get nearly enough of. The Food and Agriculture Organization even confirmed that producing 1 pound of locust meat requires only 1/10 of the land and water needed to produce beef. That meant the solution to both hunger and sustainability might have been flying in front of them all along. But as people began to find hope in this unlikely food, a new question started to trouble scientists and leaders. If locusts were truly this valuable, could they become a real part of Africa's future food system? Or would the next swarm bring back the same fear that once left millions starving? Something was shifting across the continent. And for the first time in many years, the future no longer looked completely hopeless. The new cash crop. When the locusts arrived, most people saw nothing but ruin. But a small group of people noticed something different. They saw a hidden opportunity inside the chaos. In the middle of the crisis, a small Kenyan startup began changing how people viewed the insects that had terrified their communities for generations. That company was called The Bug Picture. It was founded in Kenya with one bold idea: to turn locust swarms into a valuable resource instead of a deadly threat. Instead of treating locusts as pests, they treated them like a moving harvest. The company focused on transforming the insects into organic fertilizer and protein-rich animal feed. In doing so, it helped fight both hunger and environmental damage at the same time. It was an idea that sounded impossible until it actually worked. With emergency financial support from Danida, the Bug Picture began organizing local communities in the areas hit hardest by the invasion. These included regions such as Laikipia, Isiolo, and Samburu. They trained local people to collect locusts safely and efficiently. What were once terrifying, sleepless nights became productive hunts under the night sky. Locusts are cold-blooded creatures. When the sun sets and the temperature drops below 68 degrees Fahrenheit, their bodies slow down and they become nearly motionless. That is when the collectors move in. If you walk through those villages at night, you would see hundreds of people carrying sacks, plastic buckets, and flashlights spread across the fields, gathering insects in the darkness. The Bug Picture paid each collector 50 Kenyan shillings per kilogram, which is about 35 cents. It may not sound like much, but a skilled collector could earn between $30 and $50 in a single night. That is roughly the same amount a farmer could earn in an entire month. At a time when crops had vanished and families were struggling to survive, this surprise source of income became a lifeline. Between the 1st and the 18th of February 2021, the project recorded more than 1.3 tons of locusts collected. Once the sacks were filled, workers loaded them into barrels and crushed the insects before sending them to the company's factory in Nairobi. There, the locusts were washed, sanitized, dried, and ground into fine protein powder. A ton of fresh locust was worth around $460, but after processing, its value increased 5 to 7 times. The same pests that once destroyed farms were now creating sustainable profit. Laura Stanford, the founder of the Bug Picture, said their mission was to create hope where none existed and to help people see the insects not as a plague, but as a seasonal crop that could be harvested and sold for income. Her vision was to change how people interact with nature, making sustainability something that begins inside local communities. Today, this community-based harvesting model is seen as an innovative solution for dealing with smaller locust swarms that cannot be targeted by large-scale pesticide operations led by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. It is especially useful when swarms are too close to human settlements for chemical spraying to be safe. Insect fertilizer. For years, the same insects that once devoured entire fields have now become the very force bringing them back to life. After locusts were harvested and processed into protein, their leftover shells, wings, and dried fragments could have been discarded. But the bug picture saw something far more valuable in what others considered waste. They realized these remnants held the power to restore the land itself. Instead of letting them rot, the company transformed the leftovers into organic fertilizer. From the dust of destruction, a new kind of soil enhancer emerged. According to the bug picture, a single ton of processed locust can yield nearly 900 pounds of this fertilizer, enough to revive almost 2 acres of barren land. But the benefits extended far beyond just boosting crop production. Scientists studying the fertilizer found it promoted the growth of beneficial microorganisms in the soil. These microbes, vital for nutrient cycling, help plants absorb more nutrients naturally while reducing the need for chemical fertilizers. The result was richer soil, stronger roots, and a sustainable farming system that works with nature instead of against it. In the dry regions of Kenya, farmers began testing what they called insect fertilizer. They spread it over cracked fields, half in hope and half in desperation. The results were astonishing. Dry soil began retaining moisture again, and green shoots started pushing through the dust. Within a single growing season, crop yields increased dramatically. One farmer shared that he used to spend over $100 on a single bag of chemical fertilizer imported from Nairobi. Now, with this organic alternative, he no longer needed it. He relied on what nature freely provided. No chemical residues, no costly imports. Just a continuous cycle of growth where nothing went to waste. Environmental specialists have started calling this transformation the green cycle of Africa. It is a fitting name for a movement where every resource is reused. The locusts that once brought despair have now become part of a sustainable loop, restoring life to the very farms they once destroyed. From devastation came renewal, but even more remarkable changes were still on the horizon. The bug that saved the cattle. In much of East Africa, hunger didn't just affect people. Animals were suffering too. With little grass or water, herds wandered endlessly under the scorching sun, searching for anything green. But as droughts dragged on and rainfall became scarce, the land gave up. What was once lush pasture turned into cracked, lifeless earth. By 2022, Kenya faced what experts call the worst drought in 40 years. The devastation was immense. Over 2.5 million livestock perished, leaving entire communities without their primary source of food and income. Families could only watch as cows, goats, and sheep collapsed one by one. The financial losses ran into millions of dollars, but the emotional toll was far deeper. For pastoral communities, this was more than just loss. It was a destruction of a way of life handed down through generations. Then, help arrived from the most unexpected source. Scientists began experimenting with the locusts once feared as pests. When ground into fine powder, these insects revealed extraordinary nutritional value. Laboratories in Kenya and Ethiopia started adding locust powder into livestock feed. What began as a small trial quickly turned into a groundbreaking solution. Research from the International Center of Insect Physiology and Ecology, in collaboration with the Food and Agriculture Organization, produced remarkable results. Cows fed with insect-enriched feed produced 15 to 25% more milk. Chickens laid 20% more eggs. Most astonishingly, goat kid mortality dropped nearly 40%. These improvements weren't theoretical. Farmers witnessed them firsthand. Animals grew healthier, stronger, and more resilient to heat and disease. Another FAO study revealed an unexpected advantage. Each ton of insect powder could replace 1.5 tons of fish meal. This reduced reliance on costly imports and saved money for local farmers. Considering Africa's annual expenditure on imported fish meal for livestock feed, this discovery could save millions each year. In this new cycle, everything connected. Locusts that once destroyed crops now nourish livestock. Livestock, in turn, fed families and supported communities. It became a self-sustaining loop where nothing went to waste. The insects that once symbolized disaster had now become the cornerstone of renewal. And yet, as farmers celebrated these gains, few realized this was only the opening chapter of an even larger transformation. Inside Africa's locust farms, the world had finally begun to recover from the relentless thunder of locust wings, but the quiet that followed brought its own set of challenges. The insects had almost disappeared. Not gone forever, but their numbers had dropped sharply after years of being harvested by humans. Fields began to recover. Golden stretches of millet, wheat, and corn swayed under the sun once again, a sight that brought relief to those who had nearly lost everything. Yet, with that relief came a surprising problem. The locusts, which had become a key source of protein for poultry and fish feed, were now scarce. In Kenya and Uganda, prices for soy and fish meal surged by over 40%. Farmers struggled to meet growing demand, as the same insects once blamed for destroying crops had now become vital for keeping livestock alive. It was an unexpected twist that no one had predicted. Faced with this new reality, scientists and agricultural experts began asking an unusual question. What if humans could farm locusts directly? Not chase them across deserts, but raise them in a controlled, safe, and sustainable environment. From that idea emerged one of the boldest agricultural experiments in the region's history. In 2022, researchers from Makerere University in Uganda and Egerton University in Kenya unveiled a field-scale prototype to breed desert locusts at an industrial level. The experiment took shape in Homa Bay County, Kenya, where vast dome structures stood like futuristic bubbles against the dry landscape. The system, called Roof Park Greenhouse Technology, RPGT, created the perfect artificial environment for locust growth. Temperature and humidity were carefully monitored, and gauze cages ensured that no insects could escape. Thousands of locusts could thrive within these contained spaces, without posing any threat to surrounding farms. Their diet was simple, yet carefully planned. While locusts naturally feed on crops like wheat and beans, scientists experimented with non-food plants to ensure sustainability. If successful, this approach could produce large quantities of locusts to feed both people and animals without competing with human food supplies. Not everyone shared the excitement. Experts from a food and agriculture organization warned that even a small lapse, a broken panel or unsealed vent, could trigger disaster. Just 500 female locusts escaping could reproduce rapidly enough to create a swarm covering 40 square miles in 6 weeks. Such an outbreak wouldn't be a natural disaster anymore. It would be man-made. And the question lingered, how long could humans experiment with nature before nature fought back? From African fields to global markets, what began as a desperate survival strategy in Africa soon caught the attention of the entire world. From the dusty plains of East Africa, the idea of turning insects into food and feed spread far beyond the continent. What was once seen as a last resort experiment was quickly evolving into a global movement. In just a few years, a solution that had saved communities in Kenya, Uganda, and Ethiopia was changing how the world viewed food entirely. Europe was among the first to embrace the idea. The European Union officially recognized migratory locusts as a novel food, allowing them to be sold in frozen, dried, and powdered forms. In countries like the Netherlands and Switzerland, supermarkets began stocking insect-based burgers. These weren't just a trendy novelty. They packed up to 40% protein, nearly double that of a regular beef burger. The shift in perception was clear. Insect protein was not only affordable, but also one of the most sustainable nutrition sources on the planet. Studies showed it used 12 times less land and water than red meat, and released only a fraction of the carbon emissions. The evidence was undeniable. Meanwhile, in Singapore, the insect feed technologies facility in Tuas was taking things further. Inside the massive plant, more than 2 billion black soldier fly larvae worked continuously, processing about 110 tons of food waste every day. This not only recycled waste, but also reduced 8,000 tons of carbon dioxide emissions annually. What started as a solution to hunger in Africa was now helping tackle one of humanity's greatest environmental challenges. Innovation spread rapidly across the globe. Technologies that once existed only in small labs became part of a booming $3 billion industry, projected to triple by 2030. Startups everywhere raced to perfect insect farming, developing automated breeding systems, nutrient analysis tools, and large-scale feed processing machines, all designed to turn insects into a reliable protein source for both humans and animals. Yet, amid the excitement, few remembered where it all began. The roots of this billion-dollar industry were in Africa, where the world had once watched helplessly as locust swarms devoured crops. Today, those same lands are now hubs of innovation. In Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia, the small farmers who once suffered the most are quietly leading a revolution. They learned to transform the very pests that brought destruction into sources of strength. Their efforts not only feed communities, but also inspire a new approach to sustainability. When we think of the future of food, we often picture robots, artificial intelligence, and high-tech factories. But perhaps the real future lies with those African farmers who first saw value in what the world ignored. A tiny insect, once feared, may now hold the key to feeding the planet. If this story opened your eyes to how nature can rebuild itself in the most surprising ways, leave a like, subscribe, and stay tuned for what's next. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.